651-9519 for your free jacket, tote, and magazine subscription.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Marianne Rafferty. A security official saying former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak is slipping in and out of consciousness in a Cairo prison hospital. Mubarak was last seen in public here during his June 2nd sentencing in connection with the deaths of hundreds of protesters. The official saying Mubarak's health has declined and that his wife visited him on Sunday after rumors of his death began circulating. And a search is underway in Alabama for a suspected killer after 3 people were shot to death and 3 others were wounded at a pool party near Auburn University Saturday night. Among the dead, 2 former Auburn football players. Witnesses describing the scene as a massacre. Police say a fight involving several men had broken out over a woman. The suspect is facing 3 counts of capital murder. I'm Marianne Rafferty. Now back to George H.W. Bush, the man and his mission. For all your latest headlines, log on to foxnews.com.
Welcome back to our special program. I'm Britt Hume. On President Bush's watch, the United States faced dramatic challenges worldwide. The protests in Tiananmen Square, Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War, Mikhail Gorbachev, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And many give credit to President George H.W. Bush that the Cold War ended with a whimper, not a bang.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush. But this is a time when the future seems a door you can walk right through, into a room called tomorrow. Great nations of the world are moving toward democracy, through the door to freedom.
On the other side of the globe, a crisis was erupting. Unarmed pro-democracy demonstrators in China's Tiananmen Square clashed with government troops and tanks.
President Bush knew a lot of the leaders from his personal experiences in China. And while he got a lot of criticism for not acting, what as critics would say, forcefully, he took measured steps that would not close the door.
We responded mostly by cutting off ties that we had with the Chinese military, because the military were the ones who had done the dirty work in Tiananmen Square. He tried to call leaders, Deng Xiaoping, on the phone. The Chinese said, we don't do business on telephones. The president wanted me to go over quietly to talk to Deng Xiaoping, to try to restore or keep some kind of thread of continuity here so we didn't destroy a very important relationship. And it worked.
By November of 1989, protesters in East Germany were demanding freedom to cross over into the West. Then the unthinkable happened.
After the Berlin Wall came down, there was a wild clamor for us to show more emotion, be more exuberant.
Which would have been the stupidest thing a president could do. We didn't know how the Soviet military was going to react. They were in their barracks, but we didn't know whether they were going to just say to Gorbachev, enough, we're not going to be kicked around like this. It would have been a crazy idea for the American president to beat his chest and come over here.
Just a few weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Bush had his first official summit with Russian leader Mikhail Gorbachev. During the meeting at sea off Malta, President Bush expressed his support for Gorbachev's perestroika, or restructuring initiative, and other reforms in the communist bloc.
I wanted to do it on a ship. I'm thinking back to the days that Roosevelt did that kind of thing. And we planned to go over to their cruiser, and they were going to come back to our cruiser, and we were going to have exchange visits. Well, the seas were so rough, Gorbachev wouldn't come out to our ship.
No agreements were signed, but Bush and Gorbachev struck a cooperative tone that would lead some to believe this odd seaborne summit defined the end of the Cold War. Following his Russian summit, Bush was on the verge of another foreign policy challenge, the removal of Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega.
There was an election in Panama, and he stole the election. And interestingly enough, President Carter was down there supervising the election and said, it was a fraudulent election. So we decided that we had to get rid of Noriega, and we did use force. By the time that happened, the president had called all of the leaders of Latin America. It was the first military move the president made.
His foreign policy team repeatedly faced explosive situations around the world, but the president needed to divide his attention between the momentous events abroad and pressing domestic issues at home. Also during his presidency, Bush nominated Judges David Souter and Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. and he signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law.
The ADA ensures that employers covered by the Act cannot discriminate against qualified individuals with disabilities.
George Bush firmly believed in handwritten notes, develops bonds of trust and cooperation, and it's very easy then to get on the phone and talk to someone.
President Bush, the former UN ambassador and emissary to China, would routinely call his foreign counterparts.
And he would say, well, why don't we put in a call to President X? And the reaction was very positive, and it made my job infinitely easier.
President Mitterrand of France, who was known to be a very stoic, very formal individual, and the Reagan administration had had a hard time getting a thaw in relations with France. But President Bush reached out to him, invited the President of France to his home in Kennebunkport. No neckties, very low-key, very informal, and it helped the United States improve dramatically its relationship with France.
Bush invited other foreign leaders to his home in Maine. It was an example of Bush's style of personal diplomacy. But the real test of his diplomacy came when Iraq's Saddam Hussein invaded neighboring Kuwait.
When Saddam first attacked Kuwait, his approach was to go to NATO, to go to the UN, and to talk to friends and allies about an international coalition to deal with the problem.
And so when some tough votes need to be taken down the road, as it related to Desert Storm in particular, the President of the United States could touch base with the President of France.
Once again, Americans had stepped forward to share a tearful goodbye with their families before leaving for a strange and distant shore. At this very moment, they served together with Arabs, Europeans, Asians, and Africans in defense of principle and the dream of a new world order.
Bush had drawn a clear line in the sand.
He was able to put together a coalition of 25 or more countries, unheard of in the modern day, and it was solely on personal persuasion and his own experience and knowledge and the people he knew. That coalition was really quite unprecedented. I mean, it was almost all the rest of the world against Iraq.
Once he formed the international coalition, George Herbert Walker Bush faced an agonizing decision: how the 41st president confronted the dictator Saddam Hussein after a break.